Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kofer, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Beyond History, Using Primary Sources in Interdisciplinary Teaching and Research, which is sponsored by AM. This session is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. I'll just put a couple links in the chat where you can register for upcoming webinars and watch previous webinar recordings. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. All attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about generating any noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. To adjust the size of the slides or video, you can use the divider in the middle of the screen to slide the sizes to your liking. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to ask questions of our speakers or to share any comments. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation, so please do type your questions into the Q&A module as they occur to you. Also, there is closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the CC button on the bottom panel of your screen. Last, please note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archive version. And with that, we are ready to get started, so I will hand it over to our first speaker for today, Sophia.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you again for everyone joining us today. I'm so pleased to be able to speak with you. Today we'll be addressing some primary source content and interdisciplinary application. So with that, I'd like to introduce myself once more. I'm Sophia Eckerly. I work at AM as a faculty engagement associate here on the engagement team. So I'm based in Los Angeles and responsible for universities here in the Western US. My role in the my role at AM is to engage in conversations with faculty members and to assist in the application of our resources, both to their personal research as well as to their teaching. I can assist them in introducing collections not held at their university, as well as speaking to them about some of our upcoming and soon-to-be published collections. So today, I really wanted to discuss the application of our primary source content to disciplines outside of the humanities. I'll tell you a little bit about the broad reach of our collections and then focus on a select few in order to demonstrate their expansive reach and how non-humanities students can apply the collections to their studies. I'll then conclude with an application example, including our 1980s Culture and Society collection. So a little bit about AM. We were founded and continue to operate under the belief that scholars of any persuasion should be able to access primary sources for research and teaching. We started in microfilm and now use technology like AI, for example, our handwritten text recognition technology, to strengthen critical literacy skills and also encourage learning. To this end, AM has published approximately 150 collections in a wide variety of specializations. And this map here, this discipline map, shows the breadth of disciplines that the collections do support. Our collections and sources were designed to demonstrate how traditionally historic archival material could be used to not only teach history, but also apply the use of archives to a multitude of other disciplines. We found that this can be especially helpful for non-history majors taking classes, as well as for students who are conducting research for the first time. So what I do here in my role, along with my colleagues, is to speak with faculty who assign these broad topics, especially in required survey courses. And their feedback has told us that support in this way brings in non-majors and sparks in interest in history in that way, which we're really pleased to see. Each collection that we have published includes resources produced to help non-history majors navigate the intricacies of conducting research, and we'll speak a little bit more about that in a couple slides. But to demonstrate this in a bit more detail, I've selected 6 of our collections to speak to how our sources can be applied to disciplines outside of history and English. So when we create these collections, we partner with faculty across many different fields to bridge the gaps between the humanities and other disciplines. For example, if you're majoring in engineering, a collection like Global Commodities discusses the history of bridge building in the British Empire, for also milling and oil drilling technology. So it's really wonderful to be able to extend beyond just history and English. And I'll go through here. We'll focus on 1980s in a little bit more detail. But here's just an example of the different specialties that can be applied to collections of this nature. This is only a small cross-section of the collections that we have, but a way to demonstrate in just a small example how multidisciplinary they can be. And so, for example, a STEM student studying American technology can use the innovations displayed at the St. Louis Fair from our World's Fairs collection to research the technological advancements of the 19th century. And it's really wonderful. We've had plenty of success with students kind of studying consumer culture and marketing, working with food and drink and history, or students studying Indigenous land and water rights, especially with the US government, finding success with using Indigenous newspapers in North America. So it is a very small cross-section of the collections that we have, but a look to see how broadly the themes can apply. So in that vein, I'd like to move a little bit to discuss 1980s culture and society, which is one of my favorite collections and really wonderful. It explores the political, social, and welfare issues of the 1980s, including the rise of conservatism, nuclear threat, and the AIDS crisis. The column here on the left demonstrates just the broad themes and topics included in a collection of this size. And then here on the right, every collection that we publish contains research tools like chronology guides and contextual essays to better assist the students who are unfamiliar with potentially with this topic or time period, or students who have never conducted research before. And because I'm lucky to be able to discuss and address these applications with professors, today I'd like to look at a theoretical example based on some real life work that we've conducted. For example, this particular professor created a course on the global 80s with an open-ended research paper. So let's take a look at how a couple students could complete this assignment. So our first student here, Laura, is a computer engineering major and taking the class to fill a GE requirement. She's very hesitant to understand how a broad history survey course could be applicable to her major, but has chosen to write on, especially for this paper, on the technological advancements in the 1980s and has settled to use the technology behind personal gaming. And so this is the homepage of what a collection of ours looks like. This is 1980s. And so if you scroll down the homepage, you can see the main page broken down in ways to assist the students with that, for example, by thematic guide. But if we go up here to the top to nature and scope, it's a very good way to not only look at 1980s, but also every one of our collections to just get a very broad overview of the themes in it. And so you can go down under the overview and browse material by theme, which then gives you a great summary of the topics and themes that I had mentioned in our previous slide. You can see that it goes way beyond just politics and resistance movements. And so, for example, for the student, we'll click into new media and technology, and then it brings up all of the sources related to this particular topic. You can go over here to the left and go by document. And so for a student of this nature, we'll probably go into official papers and records to see what she can find there that would spark her interest. And so the filtering option does allow you to narrow down your searches. But for a student like Laura, she's not too sure what she's looking for. She goes in and finds patent documents for the handheld controller for gaming and thinks that this might be a really interesting way into her project and uses this document as her primary source to then complete and spark an idea for this research paper. All of our sources contain document details, metadata, and transcripts. You can see the high def image here as we're zooming in. There's multiple ways to view and to download the document. And so for a student like Laura, being able to look at this overview of a document in this way has really sparked her interest and is going to be the way that she's going to complete this paper. So now she's able to use documents like this to study the technology of personal gaming in the 1980s. And so if we move on to our next student, who is a public policy student and hoping to design local government policy to minimize disease outbreaks, He's learning about public health in other classes, but has never learned from a cultural or societal perspective, and has taken this particular class to better understand how medicine impacts culture, and so has chosen to research the rise and impact of the AIDS epidemic. And so looking at the 1980s homepage once more, we'll go into our research tools, as I had mentioned, and they have this really amazing feature called chronology, which does break down, especially in the 1980s, the decade by major events. And because he's a public policy student and knows that he will be studying the AIDS epidemic, he goes to around 1983, but is not quite sure where. And so here goes into May of 1983 when the retrovirus has been identified as the cause of the illness. And so then decides to do a general search through the collection for HIV. And then that brings him to results that he could use as potential insight into this paper. So if we go here to viewing all documents, you see the same filters that you had seen on the previous source, but he's going to select the President's Directive on the HIV Commission. And this gives an archival source from the Ronald Reagan Museum and gives a really great insight into Reagan's administration at the time and how the government planned to address the AIDS epidemic. And so this is an overview and findings of how to minimize impact of the virus and how to really assist in keeping the virus from spreading, which is going to be remarkably helpful for his paper and also gives immediacy to studying this topic. And so it's just another example of how broad this collection is, how interdisciplinary it can be for students studying multiple different persuasions. We've had students doing Indigenous protest and public health through this as well. But through these two students, we're able to understand just a small example in a small cross-section of how students are able to apply this collection to their particular papers. So I wanted to thank you for my piece today, and I'll pass it over to my colleague Oliver.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sophia. Hello, everyone. It is lovely to be joining you today for this conversation about how primary sources can be applied across a whole range of disciplines. Along with Sophia, I work in the engagement team at AM, which, as Sophia has just perfectly demonstrated, is full of product experts. We work closely with universities, running onboarding and demos, librarians and faculty, as well as running student sessions on research skills and generally being available to guide any of our users through our resources to the content that is most relevant for them. What this means, and an aspect that I particularly love, is that we have the opportunity to see how these sources are being used in practice. Sophia outlined ways in which individual resources can be relevant to so many different disciplines, and I've lined up for us now some specific examples of ways we have seen professors and students implement primary sources into their research, learning, and teaching. Just in recent weeks, colleagues in our team have been speaking to researchers using these collections in a variety of different ways. For example, a political science professor is researching Iraq at the moment and the use of torture by US troops, but they're also interested in historical comparisons and precedents. As a result, they have been using our digitised collection of the Amnesty International archives to see how the memory of the Inquisition permeates modern debates on torture. A delightfully different application of our sources is for game designers. They are using our collections to research the historical setting of their games. So we've heard of students using our First World War collection or our London Lowlife collection to research more about the Victorian and Great War eras to inform the design and setting of their games. Video games can create entire worlds, entire reimaginings of the past. Within them, from the outfits worn by the characters to the landscape they inhabit, the backstories of the characters, obsolete jobs maybe that they perform, to adverts, newspapers. Primary sources are an immediate and visual way for the creators of these games to gain an impression of how they might like their game to replicate those past worlds. On the topic of historical context, during a recent visit that I took to New York University, I heard about how English literature students there are using primary sources. Now, those students were seeking out primary sources for themselves as a way of providing historical context for the literature that they're studying. They want to be able to better situate those texts in time and space. In this example, ability to use primary sources was not an end goal or an assessment, but entirely part of the learning process and supporting their ability to interact with the literature that they were studying. There's a few of our sources that are particularly popular in certain disciplines, and Mass Observation Online and Mass Observation Project are two titles that are especially popular within sociology. Both of these resources present the sociological records of the mass observation movement, which are held at the Keep Archive at the University of Sussex. If you haven't heard of mass observation before, then it's an initiative that was set up in 1937 and was conceived as a first of its kind UK-wide social research project. It was the work of three men: Tom Harrison, an anthropologist, Charles Madge, a journalist and poet, and Humphrey Jennings, a documentary filmmaker. Their intention in creating this project was to capture and record real voices, the attitudes, beliefs, thoughts, and opinions of ordinary people. How did they do this? Volunteers. 500 people originally volunteered and were recruited to keep diaries, but also to respond to questions in what they called directives or questionnaires. The organisers also added their own analysis and observations on top of that. We have seen these collections be used as a key part of sociology teaching and research at multiple universities. It gives a little slice of life glance at so many different topics and can be read in many ways that were not intended of by the volunteers, or perhaps used to investigate topics that would not have been expected by the volunteers originally. For example, frequent references to the weather can now actually enable research about climate change or perceptions of changes to the environment. It can be also interesting to study the mass observation movement itself. Ostensibly, it aimed to be an anthropology of ourselves, of everyone. However, it is also interesting to consider how mass observation was carried out, how questions in the directives may have led respondents to certain patterns of thinking or responses, and to recognise the class and racial bias in responses from a volunteer body that was largely white and middle class. This is a handy way, then, to introduce students not only to a rich archive of sociological resources, but it can also provide a bit of a test case for thinking about their own research and biases and about the ways in which a questionnaire can affect responses in the way that it's structured and the assumptions that it makes that are inherent in its questions. Other collections have inspired writing pieces, as in the case of the University of Alberta. In a class that served as an introduction to non-fiction, the students at Alberta were tasked with putting the past back into process, into action, into the present. As inspiration for their writing, the students were introduced to the AM collections by their teacher, Professor Christine Wiesenthal, before they each went off exploring for themselves. The students explored histories of empire, medicine, popular culture, migration, and found inspiration for seed stories that brought to life some element of the past or connected to their own lives. One student was inspired by a World War I report on shell shock to write about her own experiences with concussion. Another about empire, another about war brides, women in England who met Canadian soldiers during the war and went back with them afterwards. This class used to involve a trip to an archive, but during COVID, this was impossible. Fortunately, they were able to use online primary sources to continue this work. You can see examples of some of those titles on this slide here. One resource that proved inspirational is Popular Medicine in America, which spans the 19th and 20th centuries. In the University of Alberta example, a student found the veterinary manuals that are in that resource and decided to create a collage that used these sources about a cow's digestive system as metaphor for mental health by combining them with writing about rumination, obsessive, repetitive thoughts, which I think is an amazing creative way of using these sources, using those veterinary manuals, and perhaps wasn't in the minds of my colleagues who developed this resource originally, but is so wonderful to see it being used in a different way, such as that. Saloni Sharma was a third-year student here who took this class and used the resource called India, Raj and Empire to write for the first time about her own experiences with empire, settler colonialism, and the Indian diaspora. Saloni contrasted artwork in the resource with art that she remembered from her family home that she still had. And that's just one of many examples throughout her writing of the connection between these historical sources and the present, and how much these themes can resonate with people still, impact people's lives still. Her writing strongly pertains to the strong, far-reaching and continuous effects of empire. And I think her piece is a powerful example that demonstrates how much work with primary sources can be grounded in the present and in a variety of other disciplines. On a slightly different note, this also actually made me think of a conference that I attended recently on Black British history. I'd thought going in that that conference might be entirely historical in nature, but actually pretty much every conversation that was had there was rooted in organising, collective action, and the creation of culture. Primary sources were used as evidence in contemporary political action, for example, in protest about the disproportionately high exclusion of Black pupils in UK schools. These researchers were able to demonstrate historical precedent and a long pattern of ill treatment, how in the 20th century, these same pupils were removed from mainstream education by being categorised as educationally subnormal. The conference ended with music and poetry inspired by the themes of the research and the conference. More examples then of primary sources use for politics, as with the example of studying torture in Iraq. Their use for studying historical context, like with the example of the English literature students, and their use for inspiring new cultural production, as in the case of the video games or the non-fiction writing class at the University of Alberta. As I've mentioned already during this talk, it's such an exciting part of my role that I'm able to see how these sources are used for such a diverse range of applications, and I hope you found this little glimpse into them interesting too. With that, it is my great pleasure to hand over to Dr. Stanley Arnold.
Good morning and good afternoon, depending upon where you are. First, I would like to thank the team at AM for compiling this amazing resource. And I would like to thank Choice for allowing us to have this platform. I'm going to focus on some documents that are in my area of study, in my area of research, in my area of publication. That is the intersection of race with the Olympic Games. And when we think of the Olympic Games in the 20th century, what comes to mind for a lot of people is the 1936 Summer Games in Berlin. And these games were, one of the most consequential and controversial in Olympic history. You'll witness during these games the first Olympic torch relay, the first Olympic village, and it's also the first televised game. But more importantly, the games emerge 4 years after Adolf Hitler seized power in Germany. And Hitler was interested in using this event, this spectacle, as a as a platform to demonstrate Aryan physical supremacy, athletic supremacy. And for Americans, it wasn't clear in 1935 whether a U.S. team would participate. Americans were divided. The public was divided, with one side saying, well, if we give Hitler this platform, does this legitimate his rule? Others made the argument, well, this is an opportunity for us to demonstrate that his beliefs are meaningless, carry no water. This debate was carried on within the public, within the Amateur Athletic Association, and the African American community. And by 1936, or by 1935, I should say, African Americans had been competing in the Olympic Games since 1904. And it's important to understand that for the most part, sports in the United States is extremely segregated. And this is one of the few opportunities for African American athletes to compete against white American athletes, but also more importantly, with athletes from around the world. And I'd like to highlight this document, which is Track and Field Newspaper Clippings 1936, folder 2 of 2. On the way to Olympics. Prominence of Negroes in Olympic trials recall story of Howard Drew. It's written by a sports writer for the New York Herald Tribune, J.P. Abramson, and he mentions Howard Drew. And Howard Drew in 1912 in Stockholm, an African-American athlete from Massachusetts, was expected to medal in several events. He was a sprinter. However, torn ligament doomed his prospects. He was referred to as the world's fastest human. But in this article, Abramson, with remarkable foresight, highlights athletes such as Ralph Metcalfe, who had starred in the 1932 Olympics, Ben Johnson, and John Brooks, and a new competitor named James Cleveland, nicknamed Jesse Owens. And this is prior to the 1936 Olympic trials on Randall's Island in New York City. By this time, athletic authorities in the United States had agreed that the United States would contribute. And Abramson predicted that, quote, the American Negro will reach a new Olympian peak of performance this year. Now, it's important to understand that in addition to Jesse Owens, there are 18 other African Americans on the U.S. team. And these athletes would win a total of 14 medals, 8 of them gold, out of 56 won by the entire U.S. team. And the U.S. team was over 300 athletes. And as I was reading this, I was thinking about how my students could utilize this. I teach courses in African American history, U.S. history, sports history, that is U.S. sports history, and international sports history. But for in addition to students who are interested in history, I see this also for some of my students who are in communications, who are in journalism, who are in media studies, who could certainly utilize this. This is one of the things that attracted me to this project, the sheer breadth of these collections. Now, I just mentioned the 1912 Olympics, with that, I would like to look at this. It's this selection, Jim Thorpe, folder 24. Jim Thorpe was born in 1887 in what is now Oklahoma, which was referred to legally as Indian Territory. Thorpe was a member of the Sac and Fox Nation. His indigenous name means bright path, and he was one of the most versatile athletes and celebrated athletes of the 20th century. He played professional baseball, basketball, football, both collegiate and professional. In 1912, Thorpe was selected to participate in the Summer Games in Stockholm. He won gold medals in both the pentathlon and heptathlon, and returned to the U.S., where he was honored with a ticker tape parade in New York City. He's the first Native American to win medals for the United States. However, later that same year, Roy Johnson, who is reporter with the Worcester, Massachusetts Telegram, discovered that Thorpe had played baseball and received money, thus invalidating his status as an athlete. Now, this was not uncommon. However, Thorpe, in contrast to other amateur athletes who were playing for money, did not use an alias. He used his own his own name. And this is Thorpe's, I would say, one of the more important documents in American sports history, in Olympic sports history. This letter to the American Athletic Union. He's trying to explain his actions, and he would say that where he played at Rocky Mount in Fayetteville in 1909 and 1910 under my own name. On the teams I played there with several college men from the North who were earning money by ball playing during their vacation, who were regarded as amateur at home. I did not play for the money there was in it, because my property brings me enough money to live in, but I like to play ball. I was not very wise to the ways of the world and did not realize that this was wrong and would make me a professional to track meets, although I learned from other players. And he would later say he was just an Indian schoolboy. He comes out of the Carlisle Indian School, which is a residential school set up by the U.S. government. Neither the Amateur Athletic Union nor the International Olympic Committee were swayed by his letter. And he was stripped of his Olympic medals. He was awarded these medals 30 years after his death, in the 1980s. And I was thinking that, well, students who are interested in Indigenous studies, Native American studies, studies of the American West, kinesiology would find this quite interesting and important. Now, to move away from the United States, In the aftermath of the Second World War, South Africa instituted a comprehensive system of racial segregation known as apartheid. Um, all aspects of South African society, including sports, were segregated. Now, by the late 1950s, there was increasing pressure placed on South Africa, a country that prizes its has a lot of pride in terms of its athletic uh, participation. Um, um, in this document type, South African Olympic and National Games Association, 1958, there's a letter from Dennis Brutus, head of the South African Weightlifting Association, to Avery Brundage, president of the International Olympic Committee. Now, in this letter, Brutus will speculate whether non-white athletes will be able to compete for South African future Olympics. Brutus explains that he's been negotiating with the South African Olympic and Commonwealth Games Association, and is interested to find out whether there's been any communication from them to the International Olympic Committee. Brutus is a colored or mixed race athlete and scholar. He's a teacher, and he would become a leader in the campaign to exclude South Africa from Olympic competition. He would be one of the founders of SANROC, which is the South African Non-Racial Olympic Committee. However, in the early 1960s, he was banned by the South African government from political activities. He attempted to escape South Africa. He was shot in the back, and he was sentenced to Robben Island for his activism for 16 months. His cell was directly behind that of Nelson Mandela. While imprisoned, he heard that South Africa had been banned from the 1964 Tokyo Games. Brutus later taught at a number of American universities in the 1970s and 80s, including Northwestern. And there was a move to deport him during the 1980s to the country of his birth, southern Rhodesia, which was then Zimbabwe, and which would have put him in great peril under the apartheid government, which had agents there. And as part of the anti-apartheid movement here in this area, I was involved in those successful efforts to keep him in the United States. So, along with so many others. Certainly anyone who is interested in African studies, as well as international sports history, would be interested in that. I could go on and talk about gender and some of the other areas that I covered in my essay, but I don't want to take up too much time. So thank you again, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Dr. Arnold, Oliver, and Sophia. Yeah, we have about 20 minutes left for questions. So to our attendees, I just encourage you all to put your questions in the Q&A. So yeah, and then I think we have a couple ready to go while you all put your questions in. Let's see, let's start with to Sophia. Is there a way to search across the collections to see primary sources that are related by a topic or keyword that might be in different resources?
Yes, of course. That's a great question. We actually have a tool called the federated search, which allows you to cross-search across collections based on relevant topic. And in a lot of the collections as well, it'll actually show up on the bottom that results have been found in the other collections. So it's an easy way to be able to send you to the other results. But the federated search tool is an amazing way to see all the results that would be relevant to the search topic.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Okay, looks like we have some questions coming in. Before we get to that, just want to ask maybe to Oliver and Sophia, you both gave several examples of how students are using these materials, but what kinds of materials are available in the collections besides documents, patents, letters? You know, are there any audio-visual materials or art or ephemera?
Yeah, I can start this one. The amount of sources in each particular collection just varies greatly. We're really lucky to have a lot of photographs, a lot of ephemera, some of the collections like 1980s has fan magazines. We have a lot of really wonderful audiovisual materials. Some are documented one-on-one interviews like American World War II that are personal accounts. So it's much more than just physical documents on paper. And it varies by collection, so you get a very large mix of things in each particular collection, beyond just documents.
I would just add to that that, yeah, there is, exactly as Sophia said, there's a variety of material within individual resources. We also have a few that are specifically audiovisual or largely audiovisual. So there's one that published this year that I'm so excited about, which is Histories of Hindi Cinema. So that includes lots of documentary footage that was recorded about those films, a lot of which actually never made it to air. So it's only within this resource. But that also includes a lot of the posters that were created for those films. So there is certainly a lot of visual material as well. And as an example of another piece of sort of more visual art related sources, we have a resource that's all about romanticism, and that includes a fine art collection. And there are multiple like map galleries and things like that across various resources. So yeah, I would say it's wide ranging.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Okay, Dr. Arnold, looks like we have a question for you from Kelly, who says, I heard about the Great Migration after reading Warmth of Other Suns. Do you have any other resources you would recommend on this topic?
You know, I would go to AM's collections, and but within it's interesting within the Olympic collection, the sources on African American athletes in many cases reflect their experiences of their family. Jesse Owens is a product of the Great Migration, as are so many of these athletes from this period. So it's I would say directly connected to this massive demographic shift in American history.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, we have another question here from Emily, who asks, what advice would you give to a college to begin integrating the archive's resources into classes? And maybe Dr. Arnold, we could start with you and then pass over to Sophia and Oliver.
Considering that I began my academic career in the period of manual typewriters, this is a fascinating way to uncover knowledge. And I think I would urge not just historians, and I forgot to mention that certainly the work on South Africa uh, certainly makes a certainly is important in terms of studying the Cold War, foreign policy, political science. But to somehow take this out of the realm of history and to bring in uh, students and scholars from other disciplines. And I mean, I think that could happen on a I teach at a large research university that would involve, the College here of Liberal Arts and Sciences, but also, bringing in the College of Business, the College of Education, and I think in a smaller college, it would be quite a lot easier. And I have experience in teaching in small liberal arts colleges as well. So it's got to be something that brings in the entire learning community of an institution.
Great, thank you.
I think on a practical level from our side, I can speak to that a little bit. Our collections, especially our one collection that's called AM Research Skills, provides tangible and practical resources for especially faculty in assisting students conduct research. And so in a collection like that, there's case studies, there's prompts for assignments and things of that nature that can assist and take some of the intense workload off of a faculty member as they're teaching students, like you had said, Dr. Arnold, who maybe haven't had experience with conducting research before. And then each collection, each one of our resources does contain material that organizes it by nature, scope, theme, and then research tool, which can allow faculty members to successfully integrate this into their courses, combine it with assignments, and that's part of what our team does as well.
Thank you, Sophia. Where was this 40 years ago?
It's really wonderful to see.
Awesome. Okay, thank you both. Okay, we have another question for Dr. Arnold from Catherine. How much time in lectures/seminars do you build into explaining to your students how to use databases for primary sources like this? And thank you for the fascinating source analysis.
It really, for me, it depends on the class. In the intro level classes, it's a lot, well, more generalized. However, in the upper level classes, we spend a lot more time um, um, uh, discussing sources, how to find them. And I should also say I'm fortunate to work in an institution where there are subject specialists, that is, librarians who focus on explaining to students how to utilize the databases. Um, uh, from they come from different. They represent different areas, scholarly areas, and they're extremely helpful. And I always learn something new from them. So it's really important to build those partnerships, and to I've been doing this a long time, and to be able to explain to students that yeah, even though you're in this other discipline, you can utilize this source, okay? Even though it is a quote unquote historical source, there's something that you can find that you can utilize.
Great. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's see. Another question, speaking of librarians, from Nicolette. Dr. Arnold, where do you see some of the most significant gaps in research in regards to the history of the Black experience in sports? I'm a kinesiology librarian, and as much as I thought I knew about African American athletes in sports, there's such a lack of published research.
I would say one of the areas that needs more attention, um, is the intersection of race, gender, and sports. And that's where I really see some of the major holes in the field. In addition, I would also suggest that one area that needs further inquiry, further intention, are sports that aren't necessarily considered um, within the United States and around the world as how can I put it, traditionally African American sports, or I'm sorry, Black uh, sports played by um, people from the African diaspora, if I can put it that way. For example, some winter sports. So I see that as an area and that needs more work. Also, there's been a tendency to focus on professional sports and not look at, in many cases, amateur or semi-professional. The good thing is there's a lot out there that needs to be uncovered. And as a former archivist, museum archivist, one of my tasks was to look for physical documents relating to the African American experience, and they can be found in attics, in church basements, and in a lot of places. So, I mean, this is a challenge, but I think and more is being done. So I'm quite optimistic.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have a question that came in for Sophia from Marta, who says, aside from the computer science major, have you seen primary resources used by students majoring in other scientific disciplines?
Great question. And yes, absolutely. So computer science is definitely one that has been successful, but we've also seen a lot of success in students studying the agricultural sciences, for example. We have a lot on farming technology, land resource and water management, things of that nature, but also more of the traditional sciences like reproductive health. So many of our collections focus on gender, public health, and reproductive health. So there's a lot there, as well as disease management. We actually have an upcoming collection that will just be focused on the history of epidemics, as well as the Popular Medicine in America collection that Oliver had mentioned. So most of the collections do have a lot of resources for students in the sciences. We've seen a lot of success with students of engineering as well, especially for transportation technologies. Or technological innovations, for example, the World's Fair collection and the moving sidewalk and all the innovations that we've seen develop through the end of the 19th century. So it's really wonderful to see how students of other disciplines are able to apply it. Dr. Arnold, as you said, it's really wonderful to see it bring in students from outside of the humanities. And I'm so pleased that students of the sciences have been able to use this as well. And that's something, if there's any further information, I'm happy to go into more detail about that as well.
Awesome, thank you. Oliver, anything to add to that?
I think that was a brilliant summary of the wide variety of things we have from World's Fairs to reproductive health. A lot of our collections are really popular for studying gender and the body and things like that. Certainly. And yeah, epidemics is an exciting one to be launching soon as well.
And
Great, thank you.
oh, sorry, Sabrina, just the mental health sciences as well, as you had mentioned, Oliver, like the rumination on mental health from the cow's veterinary sciences. I think it is really unexpected how you could pull these sources.
Okay, let's see. Another question came in for Dr. Arnold from Beth, who said, is your book Beacons of the Race published or forthcoming? Just curious.
Forthcoming. Okay, I'm in the process of working on it, so it'll be out soon. I'm not exactly sure when, but I'm working on it. I'm writing it as we speak.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left. let's see, this probably could go to Sophia or Oliver. Sophia, I saw that your portion showed a video of one of the collection's websites. So just what kinds of research guides or resources are available to students from AM? Like, and how do these guides help students guide them through primary source options or navigating those collections?
That's a great question. So much of what our editors and our team has published do include these materials that can help students who maybe conduct research for the first time. So for example, our Age of Exploration collection on expansion throughout the colonial world has this really amazing interactive map feature to see the spread of especially European expansion through the colonies. And that's really wonderful to be able to track that in a very visual way. As Oliver had mentioned, there's really wonderful maps and interactive chronologies that allow students to find themselves in a specific place and time and to be able to provide context around that. We also have a lot of more strategic and practical tools for on how to conduct research, what an archive looks like, or how to read a primary source and understand an unreliable narrator. So, for example, one of our research skills resources does offer some information on how to interrogate a colonial narrative and to understand how to read it in the context of history and understand and comprehend the ways in which a very specific viewpoint dominated the document. It's really interesting to be able to understand ledgers and documents from the underserved populations that you don't typically find reflected in resources, and to be able to find the stories of women and minorities who maybe aren't faced in their voices quite as well. And so it is really wonderful, and that's something that we're happy to provide. So beyond the chronologies, maps, contextual essays, video tools, and then some more practical resources. Oliver, is there anything that I neglected to mention?
Comprehensive as ever. We have all of those brilliant, amazing information side of things. I would also emphasize again the navigational tools themselves. That little search bar at the top is always very tempting. And you can think, oh, I'll just like search anything in there and it will bring back everything. And we put loads of work into the indexing to make sure that as many relevant things as possible come back from any search that you do in that way, and build that out with an advanced search. You can filter by various different topics, and that's tailored to each resource as well. So that can vary based on to make it as relevant as possible to the material in that particular resource. But then we also have a search directory and guides to thematic areas. So if there is a particular term or a topic that you're interested in, but that language or the language around that topic didn't maybe exist in the era that you're researching, there can be the search directories that have those further wider reaching subject areas that an archivist has put together. So you can still find that material that maybe you're not entirely sure what language to use or what search terms to use, and you can approach it in that way as well.
Yeah, that's a great addition, Oliver. Thank you. It brings to mind some things like the Boolean search operators that are built into the search that you had mentioned. I also want to mention once more the handwritten text recognition technology that our team has been working so amazingly on, that does allow to search through manuscript text. I know that some students especially have trouble with reading cursive, and that's a really assistive tool that we found in addition to some of the others that we have.
Great. Okay. And looks like we're pretty much at the end, so I think we'll wrap up the Q&A here. And I'll just say thanks so much to Dr. Arnold, Oliver, and Sophia for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you to our attendees for your questions and your comments. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice and ACRL with a link to the recording. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, we would really appreciate it. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from the webinar and hope to see you again soon on another session.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Bye.
Thank you.